abundantly clear to me that Louisiana boasts both a rich history and a bright future on energy. So that's really encouraging. And to explore the bright future a little further, I'd like to invite up our next panel. I can't think of anyone better to moderate this panel discussion than Zan Fishman, who's the Senior Director at the Bipartisan Policy Center and does a lot of work on this topic in D.C., as well as another great group of panelists to talk about Louisiana's leadership role in low-carbon manufacturing. Over to you, Zan. Thank you.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks, Chrissy. So this is amazing. More than 200 people showing up in Baton Rouge to talk about energy security. And the conversations this morning have been really interesting. It goes without saying that Senator Cassidy's leadership on these issues is so important in the U.S. Senate. I'm Zan Fishman. I'm with the Bipartisan Policy Center. We're a think tank in D.C., and we focus on bringing people together across the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, and other stakeholders, industry, NGOs, other NGOs, et cetera, and trying to figure out how to solve some of the most difficult problems facing our country. And in the energy space, we've kind of talked about them today, right? We've talked about, we need enough energy. We need reliable energy. We need affordable energy. We also need to decarbonize. We need to do both of those things at the same time. The purpose of this panel is a little bit about what's happening here in Louisiana. How are we making the energy? How are we using the energy to make products? And as I was talking with Senator Cassidy's staff about, kind of the theme of this panel, and if you aren't aware yet, Senator Cassidy has an amazing team, Chrissy, Sarah, so many others, that have helped put this day together. He said, the theme's kind of something along the lines of, out of the 50 nifty United States, which is the best one for manufacturing, and why is it Louisiana? So that's what we're going to talk about. And I have really great panelists here. We've got Kristen Campbell, who's the North American Energy and Sustainable Technologies and Site Development Director for BASF. We've got Dana LeBlanc, Commercial Director for the South Region for Air Products. We've got Vanessa Martin, Louisiana LNG Project Vice President for Woodside Energy. Frank Macchiarola, who's the Chief Policy Officer at the American Clean Power Association. And we've got Greg Upton, who's the Executive Director and Associate Professor for Research at the Center for Energy Studies at LSU. So, Kristen, let's start with you. At BASF, you're investing in a variety of different clean energy technologies. Can you give us a sense of what it is that you're making here in Louisiana?
Sure, thank you. And I'll just echo the great appreciation to Senator Cassidy and his staff. Can't say how much that they've really helped us as industry to continue this narrative and to hopefully continue to grow the great state of Louisiana and all the investments that go into it. So first off, I'd just like to say here in Louisiana at BASF, we create chemistry by ways of producing efficiently and procuring responsibly. And I'll get a little bit more into that, but just to remind everybody what we do, we are the world's largest chemical company. We have over 100,000 employees globally. And we sit here in Louisiana with our largest U.S. manufacturing site, which embodies about 1,000 employees and 1,000 contractors on a day-to-day basis. And what we believe at BASF is not just our stated CO2 abatement goals, similar to many others around 2030 and 2050, but I would say it's part of a foundation to us to be as energy efficient and to decarbonize to the extent possible and be sustainable. One of the ways that we do that, and it's also what we embody at our Geismar facility, is through our Verbund methodology. So what we do is we co-locate our businesses right next to each other to where we make the most of every molecule that is produced. So every byproduct, every waste stream, we try to reuse it to the extent possible. We also do that in order to eliminate overuse of energy, to be energy efficient. And so that goes to, it speaks to how we produce our products. And just to put on scale what that means, globally, our verboons, they save about 7 million metric tons of CO2 every year. So that methodology alone has really helped us. And since 1990, we've already halved our emissions by doing things like this. Looking forward, so we know we have a lot more to do. And BSF is a little bit unique because we added a scope 3.1 goal just last year. So not just scope 1 and 2 and net zero by 2050, but we're already looking at partnerships with our raw material suppliers, asking them to help in decarbonizing. Why? Because that has a big impact to our product carbon footprint overall. And so in the short term, we view things like investments in clean energy, particularly renewable energy, to start. We also are looking at carbon capture. We've heard a lot of that today, especially the last panel. At BSF, we hope to utilize it, not just sequester it. We think both have a role in this. But we also look forward to advancing technologies. One of the things that we're studying is we're looking at how to recycle byproduct waste streams and create syngas for it, so creating more chemistry for the future. What we're also looking to do, like many others, is make investments potentially or procure low carbon ammonia, hydrogen, methanol. We're looking at all of it. And then further down the road, we're watching things with partners around geothermal energy. We're watching things like advanced nuclear energy, because we are an industry that needs, reliable and clean heat and steam for the future and electricity. So with that, I say BSF, we're really taking that all of the above approach, or a portfolio approach to this. We are not committed just to one technology or one technical solution.
Terrific. Dana, over to you. You're at Air Products, and you guys are building the Louisiana Clean Energy Complex.
Yes.
What is that?
Well, I'll start with why it makes sense for us to have the Louisiana Clean Energy Complex. Air Products is a U.S.-based industrial gas company. We're the only U.S.-based large industrial gas company. We are headquartered in Allentown, Pennsylvania. We've been around for 8 decades, but we've been in Louisiana for over 55 years. So the majority of the time that we've been operating, we have been here in Louisiana. We're the largest hydrogen producer in the world. We operate about let me back up a little bit. We have about 750 industrial gas facilities. We don't just do hydrogen, do oxygen, nitrogen, argon, helium, hydrogen. That's what the industrial gas company does. But we are the leader in hydrogen. We have a large footprint in the U.S., but we also operate in 50 countries globally. So our company is very focused on sustainability. And one of the things that we're doing, and how it gets to Louisiana, is we're making $15 billion in investments in sustainable energy. What brings us back, to the Louisiana conversation is $7 billion, almost half of that $15 billion that we're investing globally is happening right here in South Louisiana. So the Louisiana Clean Energy Complex is a complex that is being built in Ascension Parish. We'll be making 750 million cubic feet of hydrogen a day. The complex is to make clean, some people refer to blue hydrogen, but we refer to it as clean hydrogen and clean ammonia. We will have a carbon sequestration piece, so talking about carbon sequestration a lot. This will be the largest carbon sequestration project in the U.S. And globally, for the projects that are announced today. So we will be capturing 95% or more of the carbon emissions from the hydrogen production, and we will be sequestering that permanently, below the surface of the earth. And so this is it's a good project for us because it aligns with, we have 700 miles of hydrogen pipeline today that services the chemical refining industry. It's the largest privately owned hydrogen pipeline in the world. It runs from New Orleans to Texas City. So the investment here for us in Louisiana with the clean energy complex is connected to our hydrogen pipeline. So we will be able to supply low carbon hydrogen to all of these customers that use hydrogen as a feedstock into their facilities. So it's not just about, what we're doing with our hydrogen and our customers, but it's also to help many customers along our pipeline as well.
Terrific. So you produce, the top part of the periodic table, and in particular, number one, hydrogen, and you're the number one hydrogen producer, and you're investing to build more. That's exciting. Vanessa, you're at Woodside. You recently acquired an LNG terminal here in Louisiana. Why did you make that investment? What's that business opportunity for you? What's the future of that look like?
Look, thank you, and thank you for the invitation to attend. It's really a great honour for us to be here, and this is a really exciting opportunity for us. But for those of you who may not have heard of Woodside before, I might give you a bit of a background, and then where Louisiana LNG, previously known as Driftwood, fits into our portfolio. So Woodside is an international energy company. We have assets all over the world. We just celebrated our 70th anniversary. We started in Australia, as you can tell from my Louisiana accent. We have very large LNG plants in Western Australia, and we have been operating LNG plants for 35 years. So we have a deep experience in LNG, and we see that as a really important part of the energy transition. We also have activities in other parts of the world. We recently started up an oil project in Senegal, which was Senegal's first oil project. So it's a really important step from a community development and economic development for Senegal. We've also got presence in Mexico with our Trion project, and we're also in Trinidad and Tobago, and in other locations we have presence in Canada. So we have assets in many parts of the world. We've been in Louisiana for over 2 decades with our oil projects, Atlantis, Mad Dog, and Shenzi, which is operated by us. And we've recently just acquired the OCI ammonia plant in Beaumont, Texas. So last week we closed, as you mentioned, on the acquisition of Tellurian, which its key asset was the Driftwood project, which we've renamed to Louisiana LNG. And that's a fully permitted 27.6 million tonnes per annum project. And we're looking to take FID or be ready for FID in the first quarter of next year on that project. That will be phases 1 and 2, which is 16.5 MTPA, that's a huge investment, and it's a huge project. And we see Louisiana as a great place for us it's a great location for this project. It's in a wonderful environment that we see a great future for. And it's very much part of our growth strategy for transitioning energy and LNG as a transitioning fuel. So we're very excited about the project, and it's a corner part of not only our climate strategy, but our climate and corporate strategy, which is we have oil, we have gas, and we have new energy projects. So.
Terrific. So you did a walkabout, which was more about than the typical walkabout. Went a little farther afield. And invested in Louisiana. We're going to come back to the why of Louisiana in a bit. Frank, over to you. You're at the American Clean Power Association. You've got a whole bunch of member companies that produce all sorts of clean power. Give us a sense of what that investment looks like here in Louisiana.
Sure, thanks, Zan. So I'm Frank Macurola. I lead the policy group at American Clean Power. As Zan said, we really run the full spectrum of clean power, from battery storage to onshore wind and offshore wind to solar. And our companies also are pretty diverse in what they do. So we have utilities, and we have developers and clean energy buyers and financial services companies, as well as traditional oil and gas. So we really do cover the full suite of clean energy. And here in Louisiana, we heard a little bit about what our companies are doing from some of the panelists this morning. So First Solar is a member company, more than $1 billion investment in Iberia Parish. You heard from Orsted, who's worked with Edison Swiss to construct the first U.S. constructed offshore service vessel for the offshore wind industry, which is a new industry here in the U.S. And we also have a company, RWE, that just leased in the Gulf of Mexico a resource base or lease size that could produce enough electricity to power 500,000 homes. And so we really run the landscape around the country of clean power, and that's the case here in the U.S. And the investments, just to put some scale on the investments of clean energy in the United States and what it could mean for Louisiana, over the last 2 years, we've had announced investments in clean energy manufacturing projects that totals more than the previous decade before. In the second quarter this year, we saw a 91% increase year over year from 2023 second quarter in terms of installed clean energy utility scale capacity. And so this is really the next generation of energy technology in the country, and the panelists that you heard this morning really exemplify the potential investments that could be made in the future here in Louisiana.
That's great. I think a lot of people think of Louisiana as an oil and gas state, which is certainly true. But as you can see, it's that and so much more. All of these new clean energy technologies are coming online. Greg, you're our academic on the panel. You're the odd man out. Not as odd as me, but that's okay. You've done research on how some of the environmental laws that were written, half a century ago were really designed for a different era, for different challenges. And when we look at the world that we're in today and the challenges we face today, there's a bit of a mismatch between the policies that are put in place and how they're being implemented and how we what the outcomes we want. Could you give us a sense of what that means and how it's impacting investment in Louisiana?
Absolutely. So thanks for teeing me up to go nerd out with Econ 101. So if any of my students
nerding out is the
are in the
thing
audience,
that we do,
you can have some extra credit on your next exam for writing this down. No, but and also, so we look back to the Clean Air Act in 1963. You had the amendments in the 1970s, the really big amendment in the 1990s, and then now to the Inflation Reduction Act that recently passed. And you think about what was the fundamental theory, the economic theory for the Clean Air Act and all the amendments? Well, it was this idea that we have some pollutants, so these are going to be the criteria pollutants, that are going to have negative health consequences, negative environmental consequences for people that live in proximity to where these emissions occur. And so when we think about a cost-benefit analysis for these environmental regulations, certainly there are costs, and we can talk about the costs, but there are also going to be the benefits that can be quantified. And so historically, it's been this balance of how do you balance environmental regulations and the costs and the benefits of those. We now move forward to the era of, I refer to it as decarbonization, but as my good friend John Flake in the audience always reminds me that his best friends are made of carbon, so he doesn't like that term. But really what we're talking about is greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And greenhouse gases are fundamentally different than localized pollutants, in that for localized pollutants, if you're able to reduce those emissions locally, you accrue those benefits locally. But for greenhouse gases, if we implement a policy like the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, which we're going to incur costs in order to implement this policy, the benefits of reducing those global pollutants accrue to the entire globe and over a very long century time frame. And so if you think about for any political jurisdiction globally, the costs of that policy are almost certainly going to outweigh the benefits, because the benefits don't accrue just to that political jurisdiction, they accrue to the globe. And this fundamentally is what policymakers are trying to wrap their heads around. Can we have a world where countries all over the world, the international companies we have on the panel all over the world, are in collaboration thinking about balancing the costs and the benefits not only locally but also globally? And fundamentally, that's what's different about today, and that's what's part of the conversation in Senator Cassidy's bill, is trying to tie those local costs and benefits to that global scale.
Thank you. I'm relieved to know that you're not trying to get rid of us carbon-based life forms, and it feels good to not be the nerdiest person on the stage. It's a little weird, a little odd.
Anytime, Zan, invite me, and
Thank
I can
you.
make
Yeah.
sure that won't happen to you.
So the big question today, I think that we're kind of all here to talk about is what is the role that Louisiana is going to play in all of this? Right? We've got these challenges that we've been talking about around having enough energy, around decarbonization, around geopolitics and trade, around the technological development. So from your perspective, from your company, why Louisiana? Why are you here in Louisiana? Why are you investing in Louisiana? What is it that makes this state the place that you are going to invest time, capital, resources in? And let's just go straight down the line. Kristen?
Sure, so I'll start. So it was also stated on the last panel, in Louisiana, we have access to the Mississippi River, we have access to rail, to truck, and we have an abundance of resources. I will say our energy diversity and our competitive energy set us apart, and that's really to our advantage. Beyond that, with BASF, in a lot of what we produce here in Louisiana, it's really the start of some of our value chains. So we play in all sectors and all markets, including personal care, automotive, ag. We have, even oil and gas across the globe. But a lot of the things that we produce here in Louisiana are upstream. And so if we can do some things in our energy transformation and our decarbonization efforts here, it touches molecules that then go across the United States and then in some cases even abroad. And so it's quite an opportunity that we have as BASF, but it also is based on those advantages that Louisiana offers and the skilled workforce that we have. Plus, thanks to one of our esteemed colleagues on the panel here, a lot of that energy innovation through partnering with educational sectors, collaborating to looking at research and how to develop these technologies further so we can really even look forward to those advanced opportunities that are yet to be discovered.
Dana?
Well, it's because Louisiana's awesome, first of all.
Simple answer.
Simple answer. No, like we talked about before, for Air Products, we have a significant footprint here in Louisiana. We talked about our 700-mile pipeline. We have 18 facilities along that pipeline. For us, it makes a lot of sense to continue to invest here after 55 years being here, continuing to invest. But again, some of the same comments around we have the skilled workforce here that you need. We have the river. For us, we need the river so that we can export energy from our facility. So we have rail. That's a way for us to move product around. So, and for a sequestration project, most important for Air Products and this particular project is you have to have a pristine pore space to do sequestration. And the geology in Louisiana is perfect for that. So if you're going to have a project such as the clean energy project that we have, you need to build that project where you can do a Class 6 well and have the right pore space to do it. On top of that is, Louisiana just got primacy. So, thanks to people like Senator Cassidy supporting Louisiana getting primacy, now Louisiana can do Class 6 wells, and that's very important for projects like what we have. So there's a lot of reasons for us to be here.
So it's not just like what's on the surface. Sometimes it's just really what's down deep that counts.
That's correct.
That's good. I like that. Vanessa?
Look, for us, having an established and growing support for the LNG industry is hugely beneficial. It supports innovation, it supports growing expertise, so that's a great attribute of Louisiana, which is attractive for us. The access to ports, access to European markets, again, is also important. Access to gas, upstream gas, is part of that. And I think then the workforce, the greater the industry, the greater the strength of the workforce, the greater the expertise. And there's some great talent which we see that we can work with, we can grow, and the jobs that will be created out of it just enable skill building and that on a broader scale. So that's mainly for us.
Thanks, Frank.
So I'd echo a lot of what the previous panelist said about Louisiana. I'm reminded of anybody that takes the Amtrak from New York to Washington, D.C. I won't use the pejorative term that some people use toward it, but you pass through Trenton, and there's a sign on a bridge that says, Trenton makes, the world takes. And that could really be said about the state of Louisiana. I spent the bulk of my career both in the Senate as well as in the oil and gas industry, and time again, I saw Louisiana as a leader in energy, spent a lot of time at refineries off the Gulf Coast. So I think the ingenuity that Louisiana has in the oil and gas space can translate into next energy technologies. And so for the industry that I work in, I think about the Gulf of Mexico and the opportunities for offshore wind. So NREL put out a study that showed about 40% of the offshore wind resource base is in the Gulf of Mexico. And so that's probably why you're seeing some of the investments made. And so that's sort of the traditional history of energy. That's the workforce side, just the historical knowledge of energy that comes with Louisiana. I think there's a second part of it, which is the politics of Louisiana. To be honest, there are some states that welcome energy production, and there are others that don't, and they're takers. And Louisiana is not. It's not just at the local level and state level, but leaders like Senator Cassidy, whether it's on ensuring a competitive manufacturing base for the United States, ensuring a modernized pipeline and infrastructure system within the United States, ensuring a fair distribution of resources through revenue sharing. Senator Cassidy has led on every single one of those issues. And so when people that are making investments in energy see that from policymakers, they're going to go toward those regions.
So kind of summing up the four of you, it's kind of one part the natural resources of the state, one part the people themselves that live here, and one part the governance that's been set up. Greg, over to you. I know you've studied kind of trends and changes over in time in employment. Can you talk about how that has affected the energy industry and the sorts of investments in clean energy and decarbonization that have been made here?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look historically in Louisiana, of course, we had a lot of upstream oil and gas extraction and services sector employment. So if you go back before the 2014-2015 oil price crash, we had about 50,000 workers in that sector. That's the upstream kind of exploration of production and services. During the 2014 price crash, we lost about 18,000 jobs in that sector. I want you to think about that for a minute. That put Louisiana into a recession while the rest of the U.S. economy was still in expansion mode. Then we kind of levelized out, and then the pandemic hit, and we lost about 8,000 to 9,000 more of those jobs. Today, Louisiana has half the number of workers in the upstream oil and gas extraction and services sectors than we did a decade ago. And by the way, Texas, for instance, our neighbor, has seen very similar trends, that they've seen these kind of downward trajectory in this sector. You might ask, why is that the case? Well, let's look at production. Oil and gas production in the U.S. and in the Gulf Coast region has grown over the same time period. The U.S. is the largest producer of oil and natural gas globally, and we've seen the largest percent increases over the last decade. And our outlooks are that oil and gas production is going to continue to increase. And so some people ask, they're like, okay, well, why is this the case? We've had a reduction in employment while at the same time that we've had an increase in oil and gas production. And the answer to that comes to, again, back to letting me nerd out with economic theory here, Zan. Efficiencies. How is it that we experience economic growth as a society? It's when we need less inputs to create more outputs. And fundamentally, that's what we've seen here. So at the same time, though, that we've seen this increase in oil and gas production, we've seen billions upon billions of dollars of investment in the manufacturing of these hydrocarbon-based feedstocks into products such as chemicals, plastics, liquid fuels, fertilizers, that we then export all over the country and all over the world. And at the same time that we've seen that reduction in upstream oil and gas employment, we've seen a decade of sustained growth in the refining and chemical manufacturing industries here in Louisiana. And so when we hear companies talking about this industrial decarbonization, the stakes are high for us here, quite candidly. Back to the initial question of why Louisiana, we have seen this firsthand. We recognize this balance of cost competitiveness on this global market with these emissions reductions. And I think that there's a willingness to move forward and achieve this balance, which is what we're seeing with this bill today.
That's really interesting. So productivity growth in the oil and gas sector has kind of led to enabling the growth in these other industrial sectors.
Absolutely.
So things seem great. I think if we ended the conversation now, we'd be like, all right, problem solved. Let these companies go do what they do, and we're golden. But you know, Jim Compton was up here on stage earlier, and he mentioned something that is maybe not so great, which is our current permitting system for building things. So I'd love for you each to just kind of touch on how does the bureaucracy around what you need to do to get a permit before you can start building, before you can start investing money, before you can start hiring people, creating the jobs, creating the economic growth, and actually like starting the path to decarbonization. Like, how does the permitting system right now affect these investments, and you know, what would you like to see different? Let's go reverse order just to shake it up. We'll start with Frank and come back this way.
Sure. I mean, I'm certainly not advocating for this approach, but it is interesting that most of this morning's discussion was about China, and anyone that would, you know, do an analysis of getting something constructed in the United States versus getting something constructed in China, there's simply no comparison. It should not take longer. The average environmental impact statement or NEPA analysis should not take longer than an entire presidential term. That's really absurd.
It seems like a fair metric.
And I mean, the debate about permitting reform has really been, about several different components. It obviously covers the gamut from oil and gas to renewables to outside of the energy space. But the common denominator for a lot of industries that are pushing for permitting reform is the idea of judicial reform. And the way that I've described it to folks, really since as far back as my time on the Hill, litigation against energy projects go on and on and on. And what ends up happening is that people pull their investments out. They just walk away from their projects. And oftentimes the litigants are suing under environmental statutes that were designed to provide the rule of the road for how to get projects constructed and in service, not to stop them. And so they've been used to stop energy projects. And so and oftentimes by the same people who talk about the need to transition the resources that we use. And so if we're going to scale up the kind of transformation of our energy system toward renewable energy, and we're also going to use traditional energy to meet this incredible demand that we see coming from electrification and from AI, we are really going to need to reform our permitting system. And I honestly don't know anyone who represents any business industry in Washington, D.C. who is not advocating for permitting reform right now.
It's so important, and that's a really good point that you made. That the permitting problems don't actually end when you get the permit, right? That's when the judicial review problems begin, when they sue the permit, right? We talked a little bit about batteries today, but we don't actually want judicial review to be like the Energizer Bunny, going on and on and on and on, right? Like, we want to have an end date, a transparent, predictable end date, so you can build it or you can't build it. But not everything has to be yes, right? The permitting system doesn't have to get to yes, right? But it does need to get to an end, so yes or no, build or don't build, reallocate your capital somewhere else. Vanessa?
Yeah, I think certainty around permitting is the key thing, and having certainty both when you make the investment and then whilst you're actually midway through construction. And I think that uncertainty is where it puts investment at risk and makes it harder to make investment decisions. And I think a lot of it sometimes is going through a bit of an evolution, and when it's evolving midway through a project, that can be quite challenging for investment. So.
Great. Dana?
Yeah, I think any company that's making a significant investment here or anywhere else, one of the first conversations that they're having is, can I even get the permits to build there? You're not going to make an investment where you think you're not going to be successful. So I think that's always challenging when you're thinking about making investments, and that's one of the first conversations you're having is, can we actually get to the point where we're building something? I think everybody knows that the delays in permitting are very expensive, and to the point made here on the panel already, sometimes companies have to pull out their investments and not move forward because it gets to the point where it just doesn't make sense anymore. So I think that permitting, streamlining is important for any company, but Louisiana wanting to continue to be the leader in energy, it is very important that we focus on making sure that our permitting system is something that's achievable, for these investments.
Thank you. And Kristen, would you forgive me if I have you answer a different question instead of this one, because we only have a few minutes left and you all know too much about all these important topics, and I want to make sure we cover everything. So the next question, which we'll start with Kristen and go to any one or two of you else that want to jump in, is on the incentive side, right? So many of these investments that are being made and planned are factoring in the incentives from the clean energy tax credits. Some people are very excited about these credits. Some people are kind of excited about these credits, but really hope they're implemented well. As you're thinking about the investments you're going to make, what are you really focusing on in terms of utilizing these tax credits? And are you trying to protect them? Are you trying to modify them, change them? What's on your mind?
So one of the things I'll say that some of our board members often say is the United States took the approach of creating a business opportunity by way of the tax incentives and grants, whereas sometimes other regions have created more of a business restriction. And so we said the word certainty around permitting. I will also use that word around ensuring these funds come through. So making sure that we can make decisions, final investment decisions, knowing that the funding will be upheld and that any guidance that comes out around it doesn't change the game. So that's critical to helping make our investment decisions. I'll also say, just to hit on something Senator Cassidy said this morning, we're going to be one of those companies that's always asking for parity of things like carbon capture utilization, to have that incentive also be equivalent to the more lucrative incentive around sequestration, for example, because we believe in continuing to utilize CO2 to the extent possible, because then we create new opportunities for chemistry. And so those are things we're very thankful for Senator Cassidy's office for. I believe that the incentive approach allows acceleration of our plans here. At the end of the day, we still need to have a market and a business case with a customer, but the federal funding approach has certainly got us to be able to launch things sooner than we were hoping to.
That's great. Yeah, and that TCU Parity Act, great bipartisan bill with Senator Cassidy's leadership. Who else would like to jump in on the tax credit?
I'll just comment quickly. You know, for the project that we have right now for the Louisiana Clean Energy Complex, we announced this project before, you know, 45V and 45Q. However, I mean, it is obvious that these incentives are very important to any company that's doing these type of projects, and it's important to Air Products as well because we want to continue to make future investments, and you know, those things, those incentives really help you make those investment decisions.
Yeah, I would add, you know, there's really two ways of in climate or you know, really two broad approaches of climate policy that we've seen. One is through mandates and through restricting business. The other is through tax incentives and incentivizing business to go out and make investments to drive that change. We obviously support the tax provisions from the IRA. We think they've been enormously helpful to help drive investment. The numbers reflect that over the last 2 years, as I said earlier, a 2-year period that saw greater investment than the previous 10. And as we look out into the future, we feel like a certain tax policy that incentivizes investment is going to be enormously helpful to drive that investment.
Yeah, this 10-year window for tax incentives really was a kind of a game changer compared to the previous, like, every year or two extensions.
Yeah, and you do see that reflected in the numbers and investment. You know, the expiration of credits drives down investment.
Right. Vanessa, different question to you. You know, a lot of people look at LNG exports and they think, all right, we're going to export LNG, they're going to burn it. What does that really mean for global emissions? And I think what you find is, like, it really matters what fuel you're displacing abroad. When you're thinking about your LNG exports and we're thinking about decarbonization pathways, how does that all play out?
Well, we see that LNG has the opportunity to displace coal and other fuels, and that's its critical role. And I think we heard a lot about that in some of the opening comments this morning. So for us, that's the big role it plays on a global scale. And we see LNG as having a long-term future in that role and in displacing those other dirtier fuels. So.
All right. So we need another 45 minutes, Chrissy. Is that available? Do you have an extra 45 minutes for us? Well, our panelists are really good, though. Are you sure? Okay. So thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Chrissy. Thank you, Senator Cassidy. And we would love to continue the conversation with you throughout the day.